people forget that also a lot of the industries in Venezuela are like nationalized by the government. The level of corruption is so big that actually people think that the cartels only administer drugs, but they're actually industries that administer, in the case of Mexico, the cartels administers in some cases parts of the avocado industry and tomato and all these kinds of things
The
and
petroleum
oil.
industry.
And depending on the city, they have, yeah. So depending on the city, the level of corruption is so big that cutting oil revenue to the cartels actually weakens them. They're so linked and so immersed in all parts of administration, right? Like even if you legalize drugs in Mexico, it wouldn't really do anything
Don't live off
because
extorting people.
the problem is why would you like the fact that these countries or these groups are able to administer all of these resources within a country. That's the problem, right? The drugs are not the problem. The problem is how do these organizations, crime organizations, gain access to all of these resources by basically corrupting all institutions? And so I think that's a part of the problem that people like don't understand sometimes, the level of corruption and how that limits any progress that can be made and cleaning up this problem.
Yeah, like remember when the cartel hacked these cameras in Mexico City to keep surveillance on some politicians they saw as a threat? That's how
Yeah.
bad it is. It's brutal. And I remember some people from Mexico City were like, because my parents are from Sinaloa. They're like, oh,
Oh,
they gave me the bad stereotype. They're like, oh, your family must be tied to the cartel. I'm like, bro, the biggest cartel is you guys, the ones in Mexico City. And they kept quiet because they know it's true. Like there's a lot of politicians in Mexico City that are involved with this. It's not just like the
yeah,
cartels
and
that
this
are
this goes with almost all Hispanic countries. I'm pretty sure. I don't know what the level of corruption is in countries like Iran, but I'm pretty sure it must be pretty similar. And where the whole building, let's say, it's like rotten pretty much. And that's the case for Venezuela. That's the case for Mexico. After this victory, the problem is not yet done. There's a lot of groups and cartels that still run the business pretty much. But that's it.
Isn't Superlay owned by the cartels, and don't they use that for money laundering and transportation? Or am I wrong?
No, you're right. The cartel does diversify their income by basically buying up shipping lanes like cargo containers and stuff like that, or they'll buy supermarkets and stuff like that.
Don't they
Like they'll buy
own
supermarket.
like Lay?
Oh,
Mercado
like
Lane?
oh, the supermarket. Ah, yeah, 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 yeah. I wouldn't doubt if they would be involved, but I feel like Carlos Slim or his associates would own like those places because I know like in Mexico is basically like a Mexican Lebanese like supermarket. Lay, I probably don't doubt it because in Mexico there's like a huge oligarchy and there's a big monopoly, like especially not just with like commodities, but also with telecommunications, like Telmex and like Telcel. They're all part of the Carlos Slim group. So yeah. Anything you have to add off here?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was gonna add about like, communism and like, how it has and socialism as well, how it has affected like, Latin American countries. Like it's clear that I mean, Cuba right now is going through one of his worst crises in its history, probably maybe the worst one in terms of they're having like to deal with mosquitoes while the people are starving. And that's a result of, economic system that basically, drowns people and doesn't allow people to progress.
I looked up because I was wondering if Venezuela, how much communism and sanctions, which one had more of an influence in Venezuela being this poor. This is what I got. So, regarding whether it was communism or if it was the sanctions, right? So, Venezuela's economic collapse, mass shortages, and hyperinflations were already devastating the country by 2015 and 2016, while the harsh US economic sanctions were not imposed until 2017 and 2019. So the poverty was primarily driven by three internal policies that predated the sanctions. One, destruction of the oil industry. The government fired thousands of technical experts from the state oil company, PDVSA and failed to invest in maintenance. Oil productions had already plummeted by nearly 50% before the 2019 oil sanctions hit. That was number one. Number two, killing domestic production by seizing private farms and factories and setting price controls below production costs. The government made it impossible for businesses to operate, leading to severe food shortages. And number three, hyperinflation. The government printed massive amounts of money to pay its bills, destroying the currency and wiping out the savings and wages of the people. So bottom line, the sanctions locked the door, but the house was already burning down from the inside. Oh yeah, go on. Sorry.
Armin, and I don't know if you know this, Samantha and anybody else, but Venezuela used to be one of the most prosperous countries in Latin
Yep.
America, along
Yeah.
with Argentina. And if you watch interviews of economists and authors at that time, they were literally seeing how their country was crumbling, and they talk about it. And they say in those interviews, what we talk about, on these TV shows criticizing the government, we're not going to be able to do this in a couple of years. And there are videos of Hugo Chavez saying, name an industry, and he would say expropriated. Name oil industry, expropriated. Businesses,
That's
expropriated.
when he got the power. But in the
Yeah,
beginning, I
remember?
remember he was moderate. When Jorge Ramos did an interview with him, and it's actually called like I forgot if it was like the 4 or 5 lies that Hugo Chavez made. When Jorge Ramos was doing the interview in the beginning, when he was just a nobody, he was like, "Oh, I will turn Venezuela into a democracy, and we'll be friends with the United States." Blah blah blah. And then once he got into power, he was like, "What?" He was like, "The United States." He's like, "Fuck these imperialists."
So now let's look at this and basically this is the confirmation of what you guys are saying. By almost every objective metric, Venezuela was significantly better off before the socialist policies were fully implemented. Wealth before 1999, Venezuela was the richest country in South America. Today, it is among the poorest. Before, Venezuela was a destination for immigrants from Europe and the rest of Latin America seeking a better life. Now, nearly 8 million Venezuelans, about 25% of the population, have fled the country to escape starvation and poverty. And currency before the currency was a stable. I can't pronounce the currency. Was a stable currency used for trade. Today, the currency has been devalued so many times that it is virtually worthless, forcing the country to rely on the US dollar. So, this is what
God,
communism brings.
But
Go on.
also, I do believe that Venezuela was a little bit exaggerated, that it was like a rich country. Like it had probably like a high GDP in like certain areas. But my
It
mom went to
was the richest in
Venezuela.
South America. It was the richest in South America.
My mom went to Venezuela at the peak of its like era, and she was telling me that even then, like she was in Caracas, by the way. They were like, "Oh, be careful with your purse, hide your wallet." Like this was
Yep.
like in
Yeah,
the
but
19.
that doesn't contradict having the highest GDP in South America. In fact, if your economy is growing fast, it actually might encourage more pickpocketing because people are like, there's money to be stolen.
Yeah, I mean,
That's true.
it's kind of like saying Brazil is a poor country because you have favelas and stuff. But Brazil, if you look at the natural resources and everything, it shouldn't be a poor country on paper.
it says on
I mean, they,
Trigonometry, he said it was actually maybe in some sense the richest country in the world, quote unquote, not
Uh,
by
no,
GDP, by capita, but yes, in one specific metric at point in history in the 1950s, Venezuela had the largest proven oil reserves, one of the highest GDPs per capita figures in Latin America,
per,
higher income per
per
person than many
capita.
European countries,
Okay.
higher income than many European countries. Venezuela attracted European
yeah,
immigrants.
when you live in a shelter country for Jews like Israel, you get to meet people. And I actually met somebody Jewish who fled Venezuela with his family at around, I think it was around 2017, 2018. We were working together in security in the central bus station in Tel Aviv. Pretty rough place. And he was working with me at 50 something because he fled. So, yeah.